I'm past that.
Don't blink light.
Folks, I know you need to catch up and you want to fellowship, but we need to get started, please. Friends, for the last couple of years, we've had these workshops. We started off with Gary Chapman, and Gary talked about, love within the church, love outside of the church. Then David Horner came in, and he talked about the evangelism and how it starts within before it can go without. Then Darrell Bodie came in and kind of reinforced all that in last fall. And then the last two sessions we've had has been with Stephen. And today is the third one with him, and this is all about leadership, developing leadership within the churches. We're at an all-time low in Friends Church, and people stepping up and taking responsibility for helping outreach, evangelism, and leading their monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, and yearly meetings. And if you don't believe that, get on the nominating committee one time and find out. We have brought in people that have shared that would be unbelievably marketable in all areas of the country from groups. You have had really good workshops. I hope you understand all that, because I've been in some bad ones, and I know what a bad one is. But 350-some years ago, William Edmondson and George Fox came down through the Great Dismal Swamp, and they brought evangelism and leadership to North Carolina. Today, we need some leadership. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but if you don't go back home and you don't develop that, and you don't encourage that, and you don't make that a goal and a vision of your meetings, there's not going to be Friends churches much longer. And we're not on the bottom of the pile. Presbyterians right now are down 54%. 54% of what they were 3 years ago. 40% of their meetings have shut the doors. Go on the website, read. It's not all false news. But I've asked Stephen, and by the way, thank you, Asheboro, for hosting the location. Thank you, the recording committee, for being the host committee for today. And thank you, Stephen, for coming and sharing. I said the other night in ministry council, if we don't prepare our hearts when we come into the meeting for worship for business and for the message that's going to be shared that day, it all falls short. I hope you will prepare your hearts for everything that's going to be shared here today, and that you take that and you grow that and you nurture that, and it's like that little bitty oak tree that the acorn falls off, and it's about that tall now, but that tree it came off of is 300 years old. are we going to grow those trees? We got to take that responsibility. Judy will be taking charge of this January 1st. I'll still be on revitalization. We'll help you any way we can. Please call us. We want to help your meetings grow. Stephen, please share.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's great to see you today, and thank you again for the chance to be able to be here and spend some time together. You know, there's not the most wonderful weather outside. I don't know if you noticed that on the way in. I was holding my breath for half the trip here, hoping that I wouldn't hydroplane at all. It was raining hard, but you're here. You know, one of the things I found in my experience working with different congregations, different groups over the last couple of decades is that for whatever reason, rain always keeps people away. Have you noticed that on Sunday? I don't know what it is. I don't think Christians are allergic to rain, but sometimes we act like it. But rain always keeps folks away, and so thank you for being here today. The other thing I know that the rain may cover it up, but I think there's a solar eclipse today, is what I read. Isn't that the case? Yeah. I think here, if there's any chance of us seeing it, it's going to be just around lunchtime or hereafter. And so if you want to sneak outside and see if the rain's passed and you can see the sun and the moon lining up, feel free to do it, because I kind of want to as well. But thank you for being here today. For those of you that I've not had the chance to interact with at all over the last several months, my name is Stephen Acklety, and let me just tell you a little bit about myself. It's the same picture I've showed you each time I've been with you, and it keeps getting more and more outdated. But my wife, her name is Emily, and we've been married for almost just under 20 years. And we've got 4 children, you'll see there in that picture. They are significantly older now than they were when we took that picture. So my kids are between the ages of 5 and 15, 5, 9, 12, and 15, 2 boys and 2 girls. And we love life in so many ways, and it's really difficult in a lot of ways too. But I am not much different than many of you, trying to figure out how to navigate a changing world. I'm doing so with 4 children as well, and trying to figure that out within my own congregation also. And so I recognize that there's a lot of challenges to that. Over the last 20 years, the Lord has given me opportunity to serve in ministries of various kinds and places. But North Carolina has been home to me my entire life. And so what the work is that you all are a part of, and I know are committed to, even by just your presence here today, demonstrating that, your work matters to me too, because I love North Carolina. And I want more people to know Jesus in North Carolina, just like you do. I want more people in Kenya too, as well. As a matter of fact, I'm headed to Kenya in just a few months, spend some time with some partners that our congregation has there as well, and the work that you all are doing there, it is real. I mean, the movement that's taking place in Eastern Africa is remarkable. It is unbelievable to see, and I don't know about you, but I watch that and wonder why not here. Mike and I were just talking about that in the back. Why not here? We want to see that kind of movement here. Well, certainly it's going to take work of the Lord, but as we were reminded of already from Ephesians 2:10 this morning, there's work that God has created us for too. And He wants us to be a part of that, and He calls us to that. So that's what we're going to lean into a little bit today. Just for the sake of time, I got the impression by the conversations that were going on just before we got started here a few minutes ago that you all know each other relatively well. All right, and so I had planned for us to spend a few minutes just around tables, getting to know one another, but instead what we're going to do, just real quick, I want to touch on a few things that we've talked about over the last couple of workshops together. In our first workshop back several months ago, we began by thinking through first the question, who are we? Right? Who are we? And a couple of the outcomes that came to the surface from that were, one, that God has worked in us and through us to impact others through His faithfulness in this ongoing journey. There was just story after story that you all shared with one another, with me, of all the great things that God has done in and through you in your meetings for decades. 351 years, none of us can trace our history back to 351 years ago, right? We can trace our families back, maybe. We can trace our meetings back, but we can't trace our own journeys back there. But for 351 years, there has been faithfulness of God seen through North Carolina Friends. And we talked about some of the stories of that and how great and encouraging that has been. At the same time, we talked about how it is typically found across North Carolina Friends that the minority of the meetings are under the age of 30. So, which means the majority of your meetings, and we're going to talk about some numbers along these lines here a little bit later, to kind of present a little bit different perspective as well, is that the majority, which is normal, okay? I want to reiterate, what you're seeing is very normal. It's not okay, but it's very, very normal among churches and congregations all over the United States. Increasingly growing older in age and smaller in number in lots of different pockets. Presbyterian denomination is one of those that's dealing with that, as Mike has already shared. So we talked a little bit about our history. We talked a little bit about who is around us. And I know you can't see this, it's from afar, but we talked about some of the differences between Generation Z and Millennials, Generation X, Baby Boomers, and Traditionalists, and looked at over the last 100 years, specifically in the United States, some of the shifts that we've seen among the generations. We've watched a number of things change in the characteristics and their worldviews and the things that shape them and motivate them and the ways that they connect and communicate. We talked through a lot of those things, and specifically we talked about some of the things that are being seen in the church, in meetings and congregations all over the United States. For the first time in recorded history in the United States, church membership is not the majority. So people participating, engaging, committing to a meeting, a congregation, a church is actually no longer the majority in the United States. Less than 50% of the U.S. population is committed to a meeting or a church for the first time in recorded U.S. history. Again, some of the things that we're feeling and seeing locally, these are microcosms of larger things that are happening across the United States. But we were also reminded that what the Bible says about who is valuable. Who's valuable? Everybody. That's right. We were reminded of that back a few months ago. Also, the value of people being together. The Bible talks repeatedly about how good it is, how good and pleasant. I think of Psalm 133. How good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in what? In unity. How good and pleasing it is. It's good for us to be together. And then we talked about the value of the generations coming together too. We've seen trends, I think, over the last 20 to 30 years in particular, where meetings and churches, congregations across the United States have taken the strategy of moving generations further apart in order to engage more people within each generation. And over the last 30 years, we've seen ultimately that that's led to a decline rather than an increase in amount of engagement. It's momentary increase with long-term effects that are negative. Right? And so we've talked about what the Bible says a little bit about how to connect the generations. And so a little bit of a snapshot, if you remember, of some of the things that we have talked about. Now, in our last session, we spent the majority of our time talking about how to develop and engage the next generation. One of the things that you expressed in our first training session together is that there was a growing desire among many meetings and many sessions and different groups of folks around North Carolina Friends to engage in more younger people in your meetings. Right? So last session, we actually talked specifically about how to engage and develop younger people in your meetings. And a few of the things that we talked about is the need to keep the generations connected in our primary environments. This came out of some research that I did about 7 or 8 years ago, as well as research that many others have done over the last decade or more, is that there is great value in keeping the generations connected. Not in everything, right? It's okay for us to have Sunday school that may be differentiated by generation and things like that, but in our primary environment, our weekly meeting gatherings, it's good for those to be together. And also talked about the need to provide meaningful opportunities for meaningful participation. One of the things that is a loud cry among millennials in particular, who would be those young adults in your communities. Okay, those that are 20 to 40 years old right now. Those young adults in your community is, I want to do something where I can actually be in a meaningful way a part of it. I want to have meaningful participation. So we talked about increasing the opportunities for that, and then creating a mechanism to connect the generations. I don't know anybody my age or younger that doesn't need the help of somebody that's gone before them. I know several people my age and younger that don't think they need the help of people that have gone before them. But I don't know anybody that doesn't need help. And I would imagine you don't either. We all are desperately in need of the help and support of other people around us. And so we talked about creating mechanisms within our meetings where the older and the younger can connect with one another on a personal level. How can they be together? How can they spend time together? How can they learn from one another, right? Learning is always a symbiotic relationship. I don't know how many opportunities you've had to invest in someone else in your life, but think about it. When you're the teacher and you're working with the learner, how often do you end up learning yourself as the teacher, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. We need one another, and we need mechanisms within our meetings in order to facilitate that. And then we talked a little bit about strategies for developing leaders, and I'll hit this on just a very high level real quickly, but how to identify, how to develop, and how to deploy leaders. We talked a little bit about that and some strategies for that last time. So that's a little bit of a catch-up. Today could be completely independent of those things, but some of it I think is important because we're going to turn a corner a little bit today to begin talking about some of the things that have caused stopgaps for us, some holdups, some hurdles within meetings and within congregations that are preventing us from raising up more leaders, not just young, but more leaders generally. And so we're going to spend most of our time today talking about that. Three things in particular that I think we need to be working on that we're going to talk about today. So today, some goals for us. And these goals look very familiar because each time we've gotten together, I think the goals are the same. The goals are the same for us. And you see here, the one I want us all to leave better equipped and more confident to invest in your meetings. I want you to walk out of here going, I feel like I can make a difference in my meeting. I want you to walk out of here going, I'm confident and more equipped to make a difference in my meeting and in my community. All right, so I want you to feel that way. I also want you to walk out of here with some clear next steps in order to invest in your meeting. What are some specific things you can do? Part of the reason I bypassed one of our early activities that I had planned for this morning already is because we've got some things that we're going to do at the end of our time together today that are very specific strategy development efforts. I want you to walk out of here with some specific things to do and try in your local meetings that I'm not going to instruct you on, but that I believe are going to rise from within us and among us. And then the last thing is that it is good for us to be together, and I think it's good for us to be reminded about how good it is for us to be together. All right? So those are some of our goals for today. And then some ground rules. Again, they may look very familiar to some of you, but first is vulnerability. All right? Be as vulnerable as you feel comfortable. Be. All right? And be respectful of the vulnerability choices of those around you. All right, let's be honest with each other today as we work through some challenging questions and maybe some hurdles that you're sensing in your own community and in your meeting. Let's be honest with one another. All right, let's be honest with one another as much as it's helpful. The second is to be gracious toward one another as well. As God has been gracious to you, be gracious toward one another. I don't know about you, but I've experienced a great deal of the grace of God. Have you? Well, let's be gracious in the same way that the Lord has been gracious to us. Let's be that toward one another as we work through some of these things today. And then the last thing is this, is that the process of arriving at helpful conclusions, solutions, it often requires feelings of chaos, frustration, disappointment, and confusion. I've got a friend who calls this stage in the process of developing ideas and strategies, he calls it the tunnel of chaos. All right? And we always enter into it in the process of trying to find solutions. So I'm sure for some of you, whether it be in your families, your personal life, in your meetings, maybe in your careers, your vocations, you have experienced that idea room, right? The room that you go to, that place you go to, that meeting that you have, where it's all about developing ideas for the next thing. And there's a moment within every single one of those meetings, every single time, where it feels like everything is just kind of broken loose and nobody knows which way is up. right? Those are the meetings that oftentimes the best ideas come out of, if you can persevere through those moments that feel a little bit chaotic. So know that the process today may lead us toward that. All right, so here's what I want us to do, actually. We're going to do this more as a personal exercise than a group exercise. You all should have a notes page, a little handout that I have for you, and hopefully you've got a pen. If you don't have a pen, then feel free to use it. There are some pens. Okay. Wonderful. If you don't have a pen, we've got some back there, and I can come bring you around one. But I'm going to put a few questions up on the board. And here's what I want you to do, is spend a few minutes answering these personally. Okay? I want you to answer these things personally. And here's what I will tell you. There's going to be some words on the board that could feel a little overwhelming. Not bad, just a little overwhelming. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and put the 3 questions up, and I want to walk through them before you begin. The first is this: what do you feel is the biggest threat to the Quaker tradition as a whole? So we're not talking in that question just about your meeting, but things that you may feel like are pressing in an unhelpful way upon Quakerism as a whole. Okay? So maybe jot 1 or 2 things down that you feel. It's interesting, we were having a little dialogue with some folks that you're going to get to hear from in just a second, and one of them said, well, I think it's the same as the rest of Christianity, and that's probably true. All right? But I want you to spend a minute just thinking about that. The second question is this: what do you feel is the biggest threat to your local meeting, your meeting in particular? Maybe a little bit different than on the macro level as you zone in on your community. Maybe something that's a little bit more specific there. And then this is the positive side of this, right? Because I don't know about you, but I find it really easy to identify threats or even problems in my life. I can point the finger to the problem really, really quick. However, what we want to walk out of here with is solutions, right? You can go turn on cable news and hear all the problems of the world today. Right? We want to walk out of here with solutions. Right? We want to walk out of here with ideas, ways to deal with those things that are challenging us. All right. So the last thing would be, what do you think will help overcome that threat, specific to your local meeting? That is. All right. Any questions around the questions? All right. It's going to be quiet in here for a minute, and that's all right. So I just want you to take about 5 minutes and spend some time thinking through these 3 questions. All right. Does everybody have a pen? Anybody not have one? All right. Go for it. All right, now it's time for the plot twist. You ready? Hopefully you may not have got through all 3 questions, but I do want you to do this now. I want you to turn to the folks at your table. If you're at a table with only, let's do this. Let's try to get 3 at least at a table, if we can, just for sake of dialogue. So we've got 2 here. 2 will do. Let's try to get to at least 2. How about that? So I think you'll be the only one that'll need to move a little bit for us. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to share your answer to number 1 and 2 with one another. Okay? I want you to share your answer about number 1 and number 2 with one another, and then we'll come back all together in just a minute. If I deceived you, I apologize. All right? But I really wanted you to focus on what those things are that you're feeling. And here's what I recognize. Let me say this before you start talking. I recognize that there are sometimes things that we see that are really obvious. There's sometimes things that we think and we feel very strongly about. But at the end of the day, oftentimes it's those things that we feel. Those things that we feel. And you know what I mean when I say that, right? Those things that kind of make you have a sense in the pit of your stomach. Your heart beats a little bit faster when you think about them. Right? Those things that you feel often reveal those things that have the greatest effect on us, right? That are having the greatest effect on us. So I really want you to focus in on that and talk about those things with one another, those things that you feel are the biggest threat. Okay? Take just a couple minutes to do that.
What do you think?
So I may close and reopening this multiple times because without the I'm gonna probably try to type some things in. Is that just a heads
As far as the first one, in general, I'm still running in my area where I have people that understand what dollars are. I even had a lady, before these elections, said no to me, kind of like, she's dead, probably 3 years ago. And we have a lot of rural areas, so harder to not get doors. We did have a 58 farm that was sold and developed in double wide, single wide spaces. But they're from out of state and not very
Take just one more minute.
I put another thing, laughter, effectively communicating a message, and it's relevant. I think they do very good messages for rural communities. We need to figure out a way to communicate. I've been in a local meeting, I thought the LACC not understanding the spread of the gospel is the equal part of it.
All right. So let's come back together. Here's what I'm going to do today. Let me ask you this: can y'all hear me relatively well if I just kind of set the microphone right here? Would that be all right? Okay, because I need to use my fingers. What I'm going to do is, as you give responses, rather than writing them on a piece of paper, I'm going to try to put them up on the screen so everybody can see them really clearly from wherever you are in the room. So here's what I want to ask you to do. First of all, go ahead and let's do this. If you would, let's start this back left table. I'd love to hear first what are some of the ways that you answered that first question about threats toward Quakerism as a whole. All right, make sure everybody can see this here, and then we will get on our way. All right. All right, here we go. Let's start back here. What are some of the things that you mentioned, saw as potential threats? And it can be largely with Quakerism as a whole, or specifically to your local meeting. Either way, you don't have to differentiate.
Okay. Well, the thoughts that came from this table was apathy towards the church and distractions of a modern, fast-paced world.
Okay, that's great. So distractions and apathy. It's good.
A lack of concern for evangelism.
Yep. I heard several people mention that one as I was listening to what you were talking about around your tables. It's good. Anything else from back here? It's great. All right, we'll go right here. Brent, your table.
One of the things in addition to those is we live in a world that is changing, and sometimes we think we have to change for the sake of change. We have to change too. No, we don't.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't have to change. We need to stick to what we know is right.
Yeah. So do you think that some of the threat is toward causing meetings or Christians to feel a need to change? Is that the threat? Is that as the world changes, we feel like we have to change too?
We feel like we need to change.
Good. It's good. Anything else you'd add? All right, right here, ladies.
We had some of the same ones, but I got to go to Africa this summer, and we've lost our zeal and our
Wow.
enthusiasm compared to, I think in North America compared to Kenya, we don't have near the enthusiasm in worship that they have.
So I'm going to make a couple of adjustments here. You'll make sense of why here in just a moment. All right. All right, what else? Anything else from this table here?
We're stagnant.
Okay. So we're going to put that in the apathy category. Well, no, you're talking about us inside. All right. Okay. All right, let's go to the table in the middle here.
Lack of commitment of individuals
Okay.
to understand the depths of the Quaker tradition.
Good. I'll tell y'all what, I can write and talk at the same time, but typing and talking is a whole different world. That's a part of my brain that has not developed yet. So I apologize. All right, let's go to the table in the back middle here.
Well, traditional or entertainment type of worship, and
Yeah.
we didn't talk about it, but aging is a big threat.
Yep.
And I feel that history, people need to know our history.
Yeah.
If they knew that, we had recently the slavery situation here in Randolph County.
Yep.
And they put up the numbers, and Randolph County, because it is so Quaker, we didn't have as many. They said there were only 3 in Trinity. And it's because of the Quaker influence, and I think people need to know that.
Wow. That is a big deal. That's a really big deal. It's good. All right. Back right here. Back left.
Get up for everything I've heard.
Yep. Same thing.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We're moving quick now.
Complacency.
Complacency. Among Christians? Yeah. Okay.
I'll add one. That's why how we worship. It's not necessarily what we want personally, it's what God wants us.
That's right.
God leads us to, and so that's a great on another level.
Absolutely. I think we've talked about this before in some of our time together. How many of you either currently teach or have family members that are currently teachers, educators? Any of you? Quite a few of you, right? Have a conversation with somebody that's an educator of somewhere between the age of 8 and 12-year-olds. Right? We expect 5-year-olds to have a short attention span, right? But the way that, I mean, you've got to readjust. You've got to grab their attention again. I mean, every 3-4 minutes, right? I mean, if you're making videos for a living nowadays, right? You know, if you watch what's made, there's a change in it every other second. Changes so fast, right? And there's this instant gratification, this desire to please me, right? And so this is a way. This is a struggle. This is a struggle. It's a threat. Yes.
Geriatric studies say that the other end, this happens also.
Wow, it's happening on, yeah, so we're seeing it on both ends.
Where are we?
That's
Most of us in this room.
That's right, looking at phones and, right, all those kind of things, right? It's building and growing across the generations. All right, let's see, what did you already said that,
Yes.
complacency. Anything else from this table here? Additional to what's up here? All right, and then the last table right here.
Okay. We said lack of evangelism strategies and a reluctance to effectively target and then reach out to our target populations. Has to be a lot more intentional about our evangelism.
Yeah, it's good. That's good.
And I'd like to add one more thing.
Yes.
I think moving out of our comfort zone, I think that's a big threat.
I think it is, right? I mean, none of us, there's a reason it's called a comfort zone, right? Right? It makes us a little bit uncomfortable, and it's that idea, we've talked about this before. Think about the agitator in a washing machine. If it goes bad, what happens? Your clothes don't get cleaned, right? The clothes don't get cleaned, right? That sometimes we need that. It's the process of refinement. It pushes us, it challenges us in some ways that may feel uncomfortable at first, but ultimately the net outcome of those things can be very good for us. So let's look here for just a second. I want you to see what we've got here. Hopefully you can see it for the most part here. I know I'm going to switch sides here, all right? Because I've been standing in front of it for y'all the whole time. All right, so I'm going to stand in front of it for y'all for just a second. We're going to even things out. All right, so you see here, those things that I put on the left, those things were things I was identifying that you were stating that are outside of your control. You can't control these things in your meeting. You can't control a general apathy toward Christianity, toward the church. You can't control that. Okay? You can't control all of the distractions that are around us. You can't make technology stop increasing and reproducing as rapidly as it is. You can't change the entertainment industry. You can't change what's happening in every single home in your community. You can't change all the things that people are obsessed with. You can't change that money rules the world and everybody's gravitating toward ways to make more of it. You can't change those things, those distractions in the world. Anybody tried to stop the aging process? Yeah. Never worked. That's right. Every day we try, but it still doesn't work. Go figure. So we can't change that. We can't change the fact that the people in our communities don't know history. They don't know the history of friends. We can affect it on some level, but we can't change it completely, right? And we also can't change this reality of instant gratification that is just swelling up all around us in our communities and around the world. On the right side, though, what we've got is some things that I would say we have the potential to affect and change even. When we talk about those things that are true inside of our meetings, right, among all friends generally or inside your own local meeting, these are things that we can actually have an effect on. We can change potentially. So we've lost our zeal. There's a lack of commitment. Multiple of you mentioned that. Lack of commitment, a lack of zeal. You go to Kenya and you see something that zeal only begins to describe. That's a beautiful word. It's a Bible word, right? But it's a word that only begins to describe this intensity and this commitment and this drive, right? And the commitment that you see among them. And we've lost our zeal. That's something that we can work on from within. The world is changing, and us feeling tempted to change. We can't change the fact that the world is changing, but we can do something about our gravitation toward it. Right? And so here's something, just a reality, okay? The world will keep changing. This is something I tell couples that I'm meeting with prior to marriage for premarital counseling. They're in premarital counseling. I always tell them this. Whether it's a day after your wedding, a decade after your wedding, a half century after your wedding, your spouse won't be the same person they were the day before. How many times have you heard folks say, well, that's just not who I married. They're just not the same person anymore. Well, you know what? They're right. But we should expect change in our spouse, and we should do our part to help them change in the right direction. Every time. Right? That's part of what a faithful spouse does, is they help their spouse change in the right direction toward becoming more and more like Jesus. The world is changing. We can't stop it. It's going to happen. And it's changing now more rapidly than it ever has in history. I don't think that's going to slow down. Statistics, analysis, all of these things tell us that it's only going to keep picking up. All right? Which is going to make all of us in this room keep feeling more and more disconnected from the world at times because of the pace of change happening so quickly. But what we can change, or what we can affect, is us being drawn toward that, gravitating toward the changing world. We can have an effect on that. A lack of evangelism, no strategy for it. Right? We can change that. We can change that. You want to know the most effective evangelism strategy? Share the gospel. What if we just started with us doing that? What if we just started there? Giving opportunity for people to engage with the Bible wherever we are. I had a conversation with a friend just this week, as a matter of fact, and he told me something that I just hadn't thought about, because there's a lot of talk these days, and I understand it, and I've said it, about how important it is to do this kind of relational evangelism. Right? We need to be in relationships with people, seeking to share the gospel. 100% agree with that. The Bible supports that to the nth degree. Totally agree with that. I want to ask you a question. How did you first come to faith? Was it through a personal conversation? Was it through a meeting? Is there a service that you were at and you were a part of? Was it a large group gathering? I'm just curious real quick. How many for you it was just a personal relationship, one-on-one conversation, nothing else, no big meeting? A few of you. How many of you it was a meeting, and it was a room full of people or more people together? This is American Christianity for the most part, right? It's majority people that came to faith in a gathering, in a meeting. So it leads us to raise the question. We're thinking about a lack of evangelism and no strategy for it. Should it be on the personal level? Absolutely. Should it be on the larger gathering level, the meeting level? Probably so too. Right? It's not one or the other. It's both and. Stagnant, right? There's the lack of movement. That's something that we can control, whether it be through motivation, but also discipleship, as we'll talk about a little bit later as well. We've lost sight of the depth of the Quaker tradition. I mean, how many of you feel that? My hunch is part of the reason that you're here is because you feel that. Lost sight of it, the beauty of this story. Right? You can go back a long ways, but even here in North Carolina, 351 years. Lost sight of the depth of the Quaker tradition and all that has come about as a result of the faithful Quakers over the years. The entertainment threat. Right? We can't control what's happening in the entertainment industry, but yet we can control, right, and speak to and deal with training our people through discipleship, what it looks like to engage in a worship gathering, a meeting, right? So that people aren't just looking for distraction and entertainment, and then complacency is certainly something we can do from a motivation perspective as well. The reason I wanted us to think a little bit about this today is because I think one of the threats that I've heard vocalized from you and that I've observed in my own observation, both within my context, but context larger too, across North Carolina and across the United States, is that one of the greatest threats that we see in congregations and meetings all across the U.S. is that we have neglected to identify, to develop, and deploy leaders from within our congregations, from within our meetings. We've neglected in many ways, I think, to do that. And so what we're going to do here for the next few minutes is begin to talk a little bit about that. And what I want to do first is we're going to have a little panel session for just a moment. And what I've asked these gentlemen to come up and help me think through a little bit and share with you a little bit is some answers to this question, but also some of their experiences. You know, what I recognize is sometimes it's nice to have an outside voice to kind of highlight some things for you and whatnot. Sometimes it's good just to know that you're not waiting in a boat in the middle of the lake by yourself, right? At night, out at sea, where it's dark and you feel like you're the only one within 100 miles. Right? And so it's good to hear other friends' voices, I think, and begin to kind of stir our minds a little bit. So I'm going to ask Brent and Rusty and Michael to come on up here and join me. And we're going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about some of those things that we've already discussed a little bit today. We're going to sit up here so hopefully you can see everyone. Slide those chairs this way. Tell you what, Brent, let me step up there in the middle. Perfect. All right. So I know these are your friends, but they've become mine through a little bit of conversation and an opportunity to talk today as well about some of these things. And so what I'm going to ask, gentlemen, if you would first just share a little bit, just your name and some of your what's the extent of your experience has been with friends and North Carolina friends in particular, and some of those things that have been a significant part of your journey with friends.
Good morning. Good morning. My name's Rusty Parsons. I grew up in Indiana. Attended a Friends meeting there, New Salem Friends. It was actually called a church when in Western Yearly Meeting. Then I moved to Ohio, Wilmington Yearly Meeting, and that's where I received the call to pastor. Spent about 20 years pastoring a couple different meetings in Ohio. Then we moved in 1999 to Center Friends, and spent years there, and then did an interim at Liberty, and then I've been was at Archdale Friends and retired in 2020 from the pastoral ministry. Is that good enough?
That's perfect.
My name is Brent McKinney, and as I look out, and I did this earlier, I know everyone in the room. I've been around a little while. I've served in my monthly meeting, maybe all the positions. Been around as long as I have, and I'm sure you have too. The yearly meeting, I was presiding clerk once upon a time, and then I was presiding clerk for Fringe and I meeting for 2 terms. So I became familiar with people like Rossi is, and Roger is, and other year meetings and so forth. Got to travel to some of those places, and I've also been involved in our yearly meeting a couple of ways that I think were impactful and has made a difference upon our yearly meeting. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mike's son. And for those that have social media, I'm Mary's uncle. She's a little superstar on social media now. I have 2 things in common with LeBron James. 1, we both wear a lot of Nike stuff. And 2, we both went pro and stuff what we were doing when we were in high school. His was basketball, mine was Friends ministry. That's about it. He gets paid $1 or 2 more than I did. I grew up in Fort Bush Friends though. When I was at Guilford College, I started as an associate with Billy for about 3 years. I went to Prosperity for 5, Science Hill at 8, and I went to Sears Square for 5.5. And so my friend Tommy Sluter, which I wish Tommy was here, he likes to pick around that I've been in Quaker ministry since basically the cradle, and puberty definitely. So
So what I'd like for you guys each to share a little bit about first is, as you think about your history with Friends, what have been some of the most fruitful times that you've seen? Maybe describe the most fruitful season that you've seen, where you have seen your meeting growing, you've seen people excited, you've seen vibrancy, you've seen evangelism, you've seen growth. Talk a little bit about some of the most fruitful times that you've seen, and what was it that you think contributed to that most?
You're closest to me, Rusty, so we're gonna start with you.
Well, going back to my first pastor at New Burlington Friends, 1981, 1982, and it was there was a lot of young people that started coming. They brought children, and so we started a youth program. And that made a significant difference because they started doing things together. They started a women's group, they started a men's group, and they just found a lot of energy in themselves. And then they became more committed to the church when they saw the cohesiveness that was building in the group. And so we went, it wasn't a large place, but we went from about 15 to 60 people. So in just a few years. So 60 is not a huge number, but when you start at 15, 60 is huge. I remember when the coat rack at a Christmas program fell off the wall because everybody had put their coats on there, and the guy stood up and said, "That's a great problem." What a way to look at an issue. We moved to Center Friends, and there was still a lot of young people that were there, a lot of young children. So that was the aspect that I saw that was a seasonal thing. They hired a part-time youth director, volunteer first, I guess, because David and Amy Coltrane volunteered for a while while I was there. But the program just continued to build. So it was youth in both of those places and young adults for us. The young adults kind of caught some desire to move forward. And I think the older leadership accepted them in both places.
I remember going to my monthly meeting when I was about 5 years old. And so I grew up in that meeting. I remember a Sunday school teacher and some of those early beginnings. And in the 80s, I would have been 30-something. And I became active, participating in the yearly meeting. A couple of things that I remember. One was in a realization that we had 83 meetings in North Carolina yearly meeting, and we had 68 pastors. This would have been around early 90s, 91, 92. And so we were thinking about what can we do to attract pastors into our yearly meeting, into the churches. One thing that we did, we worked on our benefits, our retirement program. So we need to raise some money. So we had a campaign. Remember the first Share the Blessing? 1994. I was on the publicity committee. That was an experience with Susan Stillman and Mary Budd and Viola Britt, and it was very much fun too. We set a goal of $1 million, and we had a consultant, and we based it up on a share per member. So every monthly meeting was assigned a share based upon your membership. The meeting that I attended was a rural meeting. Some of you know Pine Hill. They're no longer with us, and I've accepted that. But that little meeting was assigned, we had 183 members, and we were assigned, it was almost $20,000 in contributions towards the campaign. And you know what? They did it. Wow. I thought that was pretty good. But people supported the yearly meeting. We had events to raise funds. And those were exciting times. Those were good times. And people worked together and looked forward to it. It was a very successful campaign. We came right at meeting our goal of $1 million. We had a clear goal. We had a clear cause. It was clearly stated. And people formed around that. Relationships, attended meetings, that was good. Well, we had another similar event that came along in the early 2000s. We realized that we had an old lodge, and we needed to do something to fix up Quaker Lake. We need a new lodge. And we need to enhance our overall program there. So again, we had a consultant come in and help us get organized, but this campaign was different. This one was focused on the individuals. And we set a goal of $750,000. So when we organized, same thing, committees and publicity and presentations and through the quarters, a lot of people came together. We had a clear vision, we had a clear need. We didn't stop at $750,000. We raised $1.2 million, very successful. We built a new lodge. We set record numbers for campers coming during the summer. We had new programs. Those were exciting times, and we're still receiving the benefits of that. But there again, we had a need that we bought into. We trusted one another that we're going to get this done. The goal was clearly stated. We got behind it, and we got it done. During all of this, go back to my monthly meeting. That little meeting on the corner there up in Surrey County. We had a small fellowship hall in the basement. It was maybe a fourth of the size of this room. Maybe a third, maybe one. So we said, we need a new fellowship hall. Well, we started with a plan in about 1990, and it came up available, and we purchased 12.5 acres of land around the meeting. And we paid for that in 9 years. We paid it off, borrowed the money, we paid the debt off. That's where we're going to put our new fellowship hall. So we went across the road, and we went in debt again about $500,000. I can't believe that. We went in debt about $500,000, this little meeting out there. And we built a room which is larger than this one, and we could seat 300 people at round tables for a meeting. That meeting is used for a lot of different purposes, not just in the community, but in the whole county. The school system meets there and has their award banquets and so forth. Well, there again, we had a clear goal, we had a clear purpose. People felt good about it, they trusted one another. We're going to get behind this and make it happen. We reached out beyond our community. We had people coming and helping us, and we paid that debt off in about the same amount of time. It was about 9 years we paid off the debt there on it was at least a 20-year loan. So those are some of the good things that I remember happening in our yearly meeting.
Well, I guess there's some good points, good parts to lots of different times. I was a child in the 80s, and at Fort Bush Friends, we'd have 110, 120 kids for Bible school. I know that because Mama was the director for the Bible school for years and years. And back then, quarterly meetings had young friends time, and you had almost 100 folks come to the quarterly meeting, and you had dozens of kids come to the quarterly meeting. And so those were good times that I think bolstered our yearly meeting as a whole. And then I remember in the 90s, because Dad started getting more active in the yearly meeting level at that time, we had the Christian Ed director in the yearly meeting, and the yearly meeting office expanded and roles, and so you have more people equipped to do ministries and take those ministries to the different meetings. If y'all remember, we did that National Church Development in the 90s. In fact, I've revamped that a little bit, and I'm implementing that in our Sunday school at Cedar Square. It's an old dog, but I've tried to do some new tricks to it. And our Sunday school class, one particular Sunday school class, has increased in attendance. So that's been good. But in the 90s, you saw more equipped people being able to disciple and develop pastors, develop youth pastors. I mean, the 90s, if you think about it, back in the 80s, Mama, she did a lot of the youth ministry stuff. She did children's church. because there just wasn't a lot of youth ministers. There was a handful, but not a lot. And then by the 90s, it was almost like the it thing for our meetings to have a youth pastor, or at least a part-time person. And then in the 2000s, you saw some of the fruits of that spirit, because we would have, Dad, you were clerk, we'd have how many in the annual sessions, how many on the mountain, kids-wise?
It pushed 600 the last few years. There
Right.
were 50, 60 adults and about that many to 300 kids.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, those are some good moments, and but a lot of that had to do with enthusiasm, and a lot of that had to do with folks intentionally committing themselves to develop their spiritual gifts and share those spiritual gifts. Whether it was me when I was a little fella at Four Bush Friends, or all of us along the way as an adult.
You know, I had a high school history professor that had up on his wall at the back of his classroom, it said, "Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it." You ever heard that before? So there's a benefit to thinking about what's happened in the past, and that we don't repeat the mistakes of those that have gone before us. But there's also a positive benefit to thinking about the past too. How'd you feel as you were hearing about what was happening in Rusty's meeting? As you were hearing about what Brent shared about those seasons where there was a really big request of the people, and the people came through, and the Lord came through, or hearing what Michael shared about those seasons where there were hundreds of people at camp, and there were these movements with lots of young people and kids where they were engaging and leading and serving. How did that make you feel? There's something about hearing what God's done in the past, I think, that does something good for us. At the same time, we have to recognize that things have changed since some of those days, right? There are good things happening. No doubt, there's good things happening in different pockets around Friends. I know, because I've heard you talk about them. And Michael just shared something positive happening in his meeting with the Sunday school class that's growing, right? There's a lot of good. However, it was mentioned earlier in the report from the session that had such good handwritten notes. I don't remember what the session was, or when it was, or who shared it, but somebody shared about a reality that there's been about 50 years of decline among Friends. And so what I'd love for each of you guys to share about a little bit from your perspective. What is that? What's that come from? What's it come as a result of it? Maybe some of the things we've already talked about today. But what are some of the reasons from your perspective of declines that Friends have seen over the last at least 3 decades?
I think part of it is we've lost some of our passion as friends. And that's a twofold thing. I think that as whether it's the pastor or members of the meeting kind of lost some of their fervor to share the gospel, or to learn how to share the gospel, or to really be a little more outgoing in reaching neighbors and reaching friends for the church, for Christ. I think sometimes we have wanted to fill the church pews before we think about filling heaven. So I think we get kind of the cart before the horse sometimes. And secondly, I think that we got that passion. We've kind of lost that passion. But I also think that we haven't educated people well enough to know how to share. I think we don't often know what our beliefs are. Now, maybe not in this room. Maybe all of us know what we believe, but in terms of trying to pass that on. So I think that's, I guess that's where I'm coming from today, that we just need to do a better job to educate our own people in how to share the gospel, or how to be the gospel. for a long time, you know, we've heard the expression, we'd rather see a sermon than hear a sermon, and I get that 100%. When I was in seminary, the professor says they're only going to remember 10% of what you say from the pulpit. You know, you're getting ready to graduate from seminary, and they say they're only going to learn 10% of what you said. But I think on the other half of that, on the other part, that we need to learn to educate those who are coming after us. Not just about our history. That's very vital and important, as we've already talked about. But we also need to educate, how do you share who Jesus is with someone else?
I was the one who offered that suggestion a moment ago, Stephen, when you called on our table, that the world is changing, and we feel like we need to change too. And let me just park that idea a moment. I happen to think of a story that I've repeated this numerous times. There were 3 engineers in the office, and we had 1 technician, and we had a boss. It was Monday morning, and we all gathered around the drafting table. That's when we did all of our drafts by hand, on a big table. So we all gathered in the middle of the office, and we're sharing about, what did you do this weekend? Well, Russ had been climbing. Stan had been running. I think I actually played golf that weekend. And the boss said, well, fellas, I'll tell you this. I should tell you this, it's kind of cute. He's a Presbyterian. And he said, well, fellas, well, this is the way I see it. God put us here with so many heartbeats. You with me? Predestination. God put us here with so many heartbeats. And I'm not going to use any of mine exercising. We all laughed. I thought that was so funny. But I have taken that little story and expanded on it a little bit. God put us here with so many brain cells. What are you going to use them for? What are you going to use your brain for? What do you use your time for? We only have so many ticks in the day. The world is changing. And for some reason, we think that we have to answer every email. We have to take every call and talk to every solicitor that's there. We have to read all the junk mail that comes in, and we only have so much time to go around. We spend a lot of our time, a lot of our brain cells on things that don't matter. We've lost our zeal, we've lost our focus, we've lost our passion because of all these other things, in my opinion, that don't matter. There's a lot of things on TV that's divisive. People look at this channel and look at that channel, and I believe this, isn't that terrible? And you know what? None of it affects me. I'm not caught up in that. There's a whole different world out there with much more important things for us to be involved in. I feel so much better when I can go for a period of time, a few days and so forth, and I don't watch anything. Although I do love Wheel of Fortune. I actually like Family Feud, but my favorite is The Price is Right. You just don't get any better than that. We need to return to the things that are important and the things that we enjoy. I love being here. Right here this morning. This is good. I enjoy being with all of you. I enjoy what we're talking about, Stephen. And every time people get together and a conversation happens, good things happen. Anytime we can meet and share food or share a little time, spend time with one another, those are the good times in life. And so we need to refocus on our priorities. The world is changing. I don't care. Something that happened to me recently. Had someone said, why don't we use WhatsApp? Let's talk on WhatsApp. And I said, WhatsApp. They tried to talk me into, well, you need to learn WhatsApp. I said, okay, I'll try it. So I downloaded the app and so forth. I can't use WhatsApp. I've got all I need. I've got a phone, I've got a lot of numbers in it and so forth. I can call people. I can email. I've adapted to that pretty good. But there's a lot of stuff out there that I just don't need. And I'd rather spend my time on things that are more important. And I think when you list those things that we can change, they all take time. Mike, when you call people on the nominating committee, what's the number one answer you get?
No.
I'm too busy.
Yep.
I don't have time.
I'm too busy. I don't
Yes,
have
you do
time.
have time. We all have 168 hours in a week. Depends on how we spend it. I'm finished. Thank you. Too much.
Well, I affirm what Rusty and Brent shared. I told this at his funeral, but a little story between me and Billy Britt. And we were at Back Creek at that time. And one of the great things about Billy is Brent knows this because Billy was Brent's pastor. You get a Billyism every once in a while. And we go up on the platform, and the choir's coming up, and Billy looks out in the congregation, and there's a couple there. Hadn't darkened the door in 4 or 5 months. It was a regular Sunday in August. It's not like it was the Sunday before Christmas or Easter Sunday or homecoming or anything like that. It was just an ordinary August Sunday. And Billy looks at me and goes, "Oh, Michael, look at so-and-so and so-and-so. I have a feeling they're going to talk to me after worship today." And, this is 20 years ago, so I'm like, "Okay, boss." Well, we get done, me and the boss are back there shaking hands, and next thing you know, the lady in the couple, she comes, "Billy!" And says, "Oh, I need my pastor out of my church family. Can we talk to you?" And Billy's like, "Oh, yeah, sure. And he looked at me and he says, "I called it." My point in that little story is this. When I was growing up, it was Sunday. Dad and Mom said, "We're going to go to church." Well, I knew what that was. Church was for Bush friends. It was my church. And on Sunday, you're at your church. And I grew up with parents and grandparents next door, that if there's something, some issue that you don't like, you take your Quakerism and you put your voice to it, and you pray about it. And if there's a change you want to see, then be the voice in that change to help change it. And if that means developing yourself, then you got to put in the work in yourself. But I've noticed that throughout my ministry that it's like literally this past week I've been counseling a Generation X person, and she frankly told me, she's like, "Michael, I like Cedar Square. There's good people there, but if I don't feel like I'm being fed, I'm just going to go walk somewhere else." And it's like, where's that loyalty? Where's that putting roots? Where's that taking ownership? Where is that now? And it just seems like a lot of times in a lot of our congregations, I will look up and I will see somebody that hasn't been to Cedar Square in a while. I might give them a call. I might go by, and if they're not home, I might leave them a card there. And I might send them something in the mail. And it's like, "Hey, you need something, you just let me know. There's my number, da-da-da." And it's nothing. But then life hits them in the head with the proverbial 2x4, and then, and then they show up. And unfortunately, now 20 years of ministry, does God get some people's attention that way and be like, "Okay, you need to start coming to worship more. You need to start having more of the correct way of looking at things." Does that happen? Sure. You do have some people who, if you will, realize that Peter Pan has to leave Neverland, and they finally leave Neverland, and they grow up, and they start doing what they need to. But a lot of times these days, you just have a lot of folks, you fix them up, and they're gone again. And then they'll come back. And I still think about that, what Billy did that day. this was about 6 months ago, and I'm in the sound room getting ready to start worship. And my sound guy, Mark, says, "Whoa, so-and-so's here today." And I'm just like, they're talking to me after worship. I met with them half an hour after worship. Hadn't come in a year. But she just found out she had cancer, and he's losing his eyesight and can't explain it. They need to talk to the pastor about the Lord helping them out. So.
And when all these people come back, the church needs to be there. We need to be ready. They'll come back. Pendulum swings. They'll be there.
So did you catch those things? I'll try to summarize just briefly. You know, a lack of passion being part of the reason maybe for some of the decline. A reprioritization of things that don't matter as much, but that the world is telling us matter the most, right? That Brent talked about. And a lack of commitment is what Michael talked about. You know, and I would piggyback, Brent, on what you said there at the end. Commitment will wane from the friends and their meetings. Will the meeting's commitment to those friends wane? Becomes the question for us. Because, to your point, Michael, when cancer hits, when loss happens, when jobs are lost, when a child makes a terrible decision, they're going to come looking for help. They will, right? And their lack of commitment does speak to something, maybe, you know, that discourages us in some different ways. What are we going to do with that when they return? So let's finish on a positive note. How about that? All right, well, let's turn a little bit. For you three gentlemen, as you look at the future, maybe even just what you've seen over the last couple of years, what are some things that you're optimistic about among the friends? What are things where you see opportunity, where you see potential, those things that give you a great deal of optimism about the future?
Well, I think we heard a little bit of it today at representative body with the sustainable committee that FUM is doing. You know, they're trying to think outside the box a little bit. And I think if we as friends here in FCNC, in our monthly meetings, we try to think outside the box a little bit, how we can expand our touching of the community, how we can do things that will make a difference for Jesus. And not just fundraising things, but how can we influence the community with the love of Christ? What can we do to promote our meeting so that people will know what we believe and what we stand for? Now, fundraising things and all that's important. I get that, I do. But just to getting outside the box a little bit of what we normally do. And, you know, that's not always easy for me to do. But I think individually we need to do that too, not just as a meeting. Being able to convey what we believe to those around us.
As we have experienced a steep decline in attendance, support, and other things that we had taken for granted and become accustomed to, we've been in this pretty steep demise for a while, and the good thing that I see is I think we've bottomed out. I think it's now up to us, and we have tremendous opportunities. They're all around us. There's so much that needs to be done that we can do and make a difference in the world around us, and we need to rise to the occasion and take advantage of these opportunities. We have the commitment in this room. We have the resources. That's not an excuse. We've got to find the time. We can do that. We need to develop our clear visions of who we want to become now, what we want to do, and to move ahead. So I think there's good times ahead of us.
I mentioned before that I'd been working on a new Sunday school thing. And I basically took what was the old NCYM, Natural Church Development, which, for those that remember that, it it's a ministry that every friend ministers to one another. So it goes back to our basic roots as Quakers, where all the members are invested into ministering one another and growing each other personally, thus also naturally growing the church. Now the trick about Natural Church Development back in the day was the meeting had to buy into it. So you had some meetings that bought into it. I remember we at Forbush bought into it pretty good. We saw some good results. And then there were some meetings, it wasn't for them and it didn't work out. So I implemented some new things. We're doing a game/exercise. So I took a component from my youth pastoring days, interactive worship, and then also kind of have that small group vibe. Before I had done that in the summer, I taught a Sunday school class on Habakkuk, which if you read Habakkuk, we're going through the same stuff that Habakkuk was going to go through. And it didn't work out well for Israel. They got in the Babylonian captivity. But I had 12 to 15 in Sunday school, just listening to me. But when I implemented this, we were up to about 30, 35 a class. But what I'm noticing is everybody, whether millennial to in their 70s, they enjoy interacting with each other and sharing with one another and ministering to one another. So something that we have done for 300 plus years, ministering to each other, it still works. And how can we produce more of that? Maybe it's just giving ourselves more options to do that. Maybe if we build that, then people will come. But for us, it's been fun.
And another thing, Friends Disaster Service. I don't know how many of you have been on a Friends Disaster Service trip, but I've been on a couple of them recently. And it doesn't matter who comes, everybody is welcome. They come from different branches of Friends. We all work together, and we get the work done, and we change lives for people that we do the work for. And it's amazing the lives that get touched by that work. So I think that's another thing that I see that's helping today. So if you contribute financially to FDF, thank you, because you're a part of that changing other people's lives. And if you go and work, then you're helping change other people's lives.
Can y'all thank these friends for some of their experiences and insights? You know, I think there's a lot for us to learn from what we've heard already this morning. But I want to move us along and draw from some of the things even that we've already heard this morning. And we're going to do this next exercise as a group all together. And it's going to be this. I've got a couple questions that I'd like for you just to raise your hand if you've got an answer or thought on one of these questions. The first is this. How many people in your meeting are actively engaged in serving? Oh, we got a chair in the way. Maybe you can hear it, even if you can't read it, right? How many people in your meeting are actively engaged in serving? We're thinking kind of a percentage. So when I think those percentages, I'm thinking not just about the total population of everybody that might come in a year, but on an average weekend that would come to your weekly meeting. Take that number and then take the number of people that are serving in that meeting, and let's get a roundabout percentage. So if 10 out of 100, or if 20 out of 50, right? So 10 out of 100 would be at what percent?
2.
Hey, okay, you're good. What about 20 out of 50?
40.
All right, so we got a couple mathematicians in the room. All right, so if you just need to tell us a number, that's fine too, if you don't come up with a percentage. But raise your hand if you'd be willing to share. What do you think the number of people that are serving in your meeting are? Yes?
I think about a third. We're around 40-ish, and we have 15 at least.
Okay.
So we're pretty good.
Around a third. That's good. That's good. Who else?
25.
25%, so a quarter. All right. Others?
I wish ours was as good as that. I'd say we're probably close to 12 to 15.
Okay, 12 to 15%. Great. Who else? Yeah.
I feel lucky. I think we're up to 40% of it.
Okay. Wow. That's good. That's good. Some of you are still calculating in your brain, I think. Again, if you want to just tell us numbers, that's okay too. What do you think? Roundabout, just an estimate. It's not scientific right now. What do you think? Yes?
About 30-35%.
Okay, 30-35%. 25%? Any others? Any others significantly higher or lower than that 25 to 30% range? Sounds to be about average. Okay, so what factors do you think, and share those with us, what factors do you think have the greatest influence on the percentage of people? So what is it that's keeping it low if you feel like it's low? What is it that's pushing it up if you feel like it's in a healthy position? So what do you think? What are the factors that affect that the most? Commitment. So a level of commitment that people have, that people feel. It's good. What else?
I learned a few years ago, some need to be asked.
Yes. Yeah.
I needed about 3 things help with. I put a little bright green flyer in the bulletin, and when worship was over, I had 3 volunteers.
There you go.
One of them was deliver meals, so.
A little bit bigger request of people, but they're still willing to do it. So sometimes, you know, the factor that may be pushing it down is that we're not asking. The factor that may be pushing it up could be that we're asking and people are responding. Yes?
Part of what they're interested in outside of the church.
That's right. So identifying those things that they're actually gifted at and skilled at, interested in, for sure. Find ways to incorporate those things into the opportunities that they have to serve. That can definitely push it up. What else? Other ideas? The factors that are influencing that the most?
Outside influences of daily activities, commitments to other,
That's right.
other committees and other things.
Yep. Right. There's busyness.
Encouraging people.
That's right. Yeah, encouraging
They did a
people to
good
do it.
job.
That's right. Say, hey, way to go. Thank you. Thank you for doing it. You know, the words thank you go a long way, don't they? Go a really long way. But I think busyness is one of those factors, too, that can push that down a little bit. People have a million things going on, but like Brent reminded us of just a minute ago, we've got to maybe help people see what matters most, right? What's most important. Well, what are some ways you think that you might be able to increase that? What do you think? This is an out loud kind of group brainstorm session right here. What do you think? What are some ways that you can increase the number of people that are serving in your meeting?
I think we do a better job in cross-generational communication. We can pull our late teens and 20-somethings into a more meaningful role earlier.
Yeah.
And keep them there.
Yeah. Yeah. So catch people earlier when they're younger, right? And help. Then you get the Michaels of the world that started when they were in the cradle, right? Stay with you all the way through. That's good. What else? Other ideas? Sawyer being there?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons my meeting is blessed is we've got good volunteers for the normal activities, Sunday school, the kids programs, adult programs, but we've also got a couple of people that keep focused on outside community needs. And then beyond that, we've got a couple of groups that address that. The ladies Bible study group starting some discipleship, and a men's group do some physical projects if it needed.
It's fantastic. Fantastic. Giving people multiple avenues to serve, right? Lots of different variety. Now, sometimes we can do that so far that there's one person doing everything and that's it. Right? So we can take that too far too. We still got to draw lines and boundaries and have some clear guardrails to say, hey, this is what we're going to give our attention to and what we're not going to. But the more variety of opportunity that there is, the more opportunity and on-ramp there is for people to serve. What else? What other factors do you think? What are some ways that we can engage more people in serving in your meeting?
Mentoring.
Mentoring. How so?
Well, like, you know, it's one thing you have a lot of older Sunday school teachers, but I think if you pair them with a younger person and you work as a team, then they learn how to teach Sunday school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know if you have, how many of you in the room have ever worked with kids in kids programs? Probably most of the people in this room have. How many of you were like deer in the headlights the first time you did it? It's terrifying. The first time you did it, I mean,
First year?
maybe it was the second time because you went the first time and realized what you were getting into, right? Right? But there's something about, there's this comfort level of going, well, we're not going to just throw you in the deep end, right? We're gonna give you an opportunity to come alongside of somebody else and learn for a little bit. I think there's a great benefit in that. It's good. Any other ideas around that? How to increase opportunities for serving?
Avoid criticizing someone when they do something and don't do it like Uncle Joe did 20 years ago.
That is a great word. A great word. You want to run volunteers off? Criticize them. Right? And for the wrong things, that is. Right? Sometimes we got to help people see the better way to do some things. However, man, when we're just comparing them to the glory days, or the way somebody else did it, that can really hamstring us. That can cut back our opportunities for sure. But the flip side of that is true too, right? We encourage them. Wait, thank you for doing this. Tell them how meaningful it is for this family or for this individual or for these people that are getting to experience this ministry because of them serving. There's lots of different ways to go about doing this. So that's really what we're going to spend the majority of the rest of our time today talking a little bit about. Is what does it look like to engage more folks in serving in our local meetings? And we've got a few minutes here before lunch, so I want to spend a few minutes talking about kind of introducing what we're going to spend the afternoon looking at before we get time to move to lunch. So through my own years of ministry and my experience in ministry, and I'm sure many of you in this room would say that you've seen it in various ways. Again, I wasn't thinking in all the numbers as you were sharing some of what you've seen in your own meetings, but I would say generally there is something that early in my ministry I felt long before I ever set eyes on it and gave it a name or heard other people give it a name. And it's a principle that I think we see play out in a lot of different spaces, not just in churches, but it's a principle that plays out specifically in churches as well. And it is what I typically refer to, I know others have called it other things, but the 80-20 principle. You familiar with this? How many of you have heard this before? The 80-20 principle is that 80% of the work is being done by 20% of the people. Right? 80% of the work is being done by 20% of the people. Now, I know some churches that would say, oh, that's not right. It's only 10% that's doing 90% of the work. Right? Or 5% that's doing 100% of the work. Right? Now, sometimes it swings a little bit further. Right? And 100% of the work's being done by 40% of the people. Those don't always have to add up to 100, in case you're wondering. Right? It actually should add up to 200 in an ideal world. 100% of the work's being done by 100% of the people. But the higher that total number, the better. Right? That's what we want to see happen. But the 80-20 principle is something that is real in a lot of churches. And I'm sure, based on what you've already shared, is true in some of your meetings as well. Now, I don't know if you know the history of the 80-20 principle. Anybody know where it came from? This is a test. You get to go first at lunch if you get it right.
Even I can come up with it.
No, I wish. I wish. I'd write a book if I did, but I didn't. So this came, this is interesting, 1896. Your problems are not new problems. In the year 1896, there was an Italian economist by the name of Paletto. And Paletto was observing some things happening economically around Italy. And he came up to this realization that this is what he found, is that in 1896, 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people. So he was doing economic work, right? He was looking at trends and money flow and ownership and property and all those things that flow into economic factors. And he said 80% of the land in Italy is owned by 20% of its people. And then he began to look in his own life, and he began to see that in his own garden, 80% of the fruit, the produce of his garden was coming from 20% of his garden. I think he might have had a soil issue. We were talking about soil issues earlier. I'm not sure about that. But he discovered this principle called the Paletto principle initially, and it's the 80-20 principle. That in many, many ways, and in many, many places, and many spaces, and different environments, it plays out in different ways. Think about it this way. I'm a big sports fan. I've shared that with you before. I love basketball more than anything. It's not uncommon for 20% of the players on a team to score 80% of the points. Pretty normal, especially in the NBA. You've got superstars that are scoring 25, 35, 45 points a game, and their team, is And there's 2 of them on there that did that totaled 70 points, and they scored 110 points. So you see this on a normal basis. You see it in a lot of different ways. You might also see it where a company makes 80% of their profits off of 20% of their goods. Right? One product line that just makes all the money. Right? And I'm friends with folks in a couple of publishing industries, and almost exclusively in Christian publishing, this is true. Do you know that most books that get published in Christian publishing don't make money? They just spend money. Right? So there's a couple of product lines in that industry that make the majority of the money. Right? The others just sort of are tests every year, right, to see if anything else will take. And so it's normal that we see this 80-20 principle play out. And so today what we're going to do, because I think it's a real principle inside the church, I think it's a real principle that you're seeing inside of your meetings in particular, is we're going to talk about 3 possible contributing factors. Okay, 3 possible contributing factors to the 80-20 principle playing out in your particular meetings. What we're going to do is we're going to dialogue through each of these 3 after lunch. Okay, but let me give you a little bit of a heads up of some of where we're going with those. And it's interesting, and I didn't plan this, even though I had spoken briefly with these guys before the panel. I think all 3 of these ended up showing themselves in the discussion that we had just a few moments ago with Michael, with Brent, and with Rusty. Okay, the 3 are this, is that there's a growing divide, right, between the clergy and the laity. There's a divide that's been placed. I found it really interesting, Michael, as you were sharing about how when your mother was doing a lot of things with youth as you were growing up, and then we started hiring youth directors and youth pastors, and the number of people helping got lower. Isn't it interesting? Right? There's this divide between we hire people to do these things, or we pay people to do these things, or we give people a title to do these things, and therefore the other people do less. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that being a factor to this. We're also going to talk a little bit about how we fail sometimes to focus on who we do have. Who we do have. There's people in your meetings. I didn't hear anybody say 100%. Is there anybody that would say that 100% of the people in your meeting are serving regularly? Anybody? If so, you might be the only person in your meeting. All right? Sometimes we're just missing the people that are right in front of us. Sometimes it's not engaging the people that we already do have. And then the last thing is thinking about who is new in your community. Thinking about who is new in your community. Typically, I think we have a very narrow focus when we start talking about the new people in our community. All right, and we're going to talk about how to expand that view of who is new in our community. And so the goal today, in addition to what I've shared earlier already, is that if you are currently in a position in your meeting where 80% of the work is being done by 20% of the people, my hope is that over the next quarter, that 80% of the work is being done by 21% of the people. You know, sometimes I think we set our sights on being able to say 100% is being done by 100%. And because we only got to 80-21, we feel like we haven't gone anywhere. I think I finally gotten to the point in my life, and I don't know about how you all are wired and how you operate, I like progress. I really like progress. There's times where I kind of beat myself up because I feel like I haven't made the progress that I want to make. Right? So I find myself setting a million little goals just about every day because I want to feel like I'm making progress all the time. And there's something that can be a little bit overwhelming about putting too many goals in place, but I think one of the things that can really drain us is when we don't recognize the progress that we have made because it's not the progress that we want. The goal coming out of today is that you in your meeting can take one step. I'm convinced that the most important step every single one of us needs to take today is the next one. Not the one that needs to be taken 15 years from now, not the one that needs to be taken 15 months from now, not the one that needs to be taken 15 days from now. The next step is the most important step every single one of us has to take. And so my goal for us today is that maybe you would walk out of here with some strategies, some things you can hold on to, some tangible things that you can go. I think that we can move from 80-20 to 80-21. I think that we can move from 80-20 to 80-25 or to 82-25. Right? That we can see growth in the number of people, the percentage of people, the proportion of people that are engaging and serving within our meeting. So that's the goal of what we're gonna do today. And again, I want to remind you, the most important thing you need to take out of here today is maybe just the one next step that you and your meeting need to take. All right? Sound good? All right. So all this morning has been is just setting us up. All right, to talk about these three factors that I think are contributing to the 80-20 principle. So I think is it lunchtime?
Well, I'm sure for back yet or not.
All right.
Hang on.
So
Yes,
give me
Brent.
an example.
Let's hear it.
Give me an example. I belong to a civic club, and once a month we provide a community breakfast.
There are people in the members in the club that they come in and they know what to do. Some will cook ham, some do sausage, some put the apples in the oven, some make the biscuits, some crack the eggs, on and on and on. Well, we have one member who really, really well-intended decides that, I'm going to help out. I'm going to make the sausage gravy at home and bring it in a crock pot. And not only that, I'm going to make the grits also and bring them in. That sounds great, don't it? Well-intended, going to help out. There's a guy who typically comes and makes the sausage gravy, even brings his own frying pan. Quit coming. He quit coming. He doesn't have a place. So I think as members, as leaders in organizations, we need to make sure that we're not doing things that someone else can do. Sometimes we need to step aside and get other people involved. If we're going to get that 21%, we need to look inward also. We have somebody else that has the same capability, but we've been doing that a long time. If you feel comfortable and your ego will handle it, I'll give you an idea. Wash the dishes, because nobody wants to do that. All right? Sometimes we need to just assess our own action.
That's good. So it looks like we've got a few more minutes before lunch. So let's do this. We're going to keep moving then for just a few minutes. Is that all right? 5 minutes? Perfect. Perfect. 5 minutes is perfect then. So here's what I want to ask you to do. I want us to talk for a minute about what you've done for a vocation. All right? So this isn't anything about your meeting. This isn't anything about the roles that you've served in. I would love for you to share with me and share with the group what's been your vocation, your primary vocation throughout your career. All right? What do we have in here at this table? Vocation. What have you done for work?
I was a neurointensive care nurse.
All right. All right. So, wow. I don't feel like anybody wants to go after you. That's good. So a nurse. What else?
I was a school teacher, and now I'm a bookkeeper for a
School teacher and a bookkeeper. Secretary. Good. What about who else? We don't have to go table by table. What are some of the other vocations represented in the room?
Kindergarten teacher.
Kindergarten teacher. God bless you.
Physician assistant.
A physician assistant. PA.
Engineer.
An engineer. Yes.
Librarian and teacher.
A librarian and teacher.
Veterinarian.
A vet. Is it offensive to call you a vet instead of a veterinarian? Okay, I want to make sure. All right. What else?
Heavy equipment mechanic.
A mechanic. Wow, heavy equipment mechanic. All right. What else? What other vocations do we have represented in the room?
Architect.
An architect.
I can top it.
All right.
Collect county property tax.
That's tougher than kindergarten, I think. That's tough. What else?
Hay farmer.
A farmer, a hay farmer. That's good. What else?
Social work consultant.
Social work consultant. All right. We got any ministers in the room? I know we got at least a couple, right? Yeah. Okay. What else?
Business manager.
A business manager. What was that?
Former legislator.
Former legislator. All right, so let me ask you this question. Which one of those careers, those vocations, is the most important? All of them. Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you a scenario that I think plays itself out in our churches on a regular basis. We have well-educated, articulate people that open up the Bible and tell us a little bit about what it says. And typically we call them ministers or pastors at times. They have different leadership capacities in our meetings, our churches. And they say on a regular basis things like, the Bible is really important. We all need to be growing. Making disciples is an essential part of all the things that we are doing as Christians. We ought to be a significant part of it. And then they remind us that we each have a responsibility to be doing that. And for some reason, when we listen to an articulate, well-educated person talk about how important the Bible is, how important discipleship is, how important evangelism is, when they tell us to do it, what do we think? I don't know if I can do that. Not as well as you can.
Well, that's what Moses said, wasn't it?
It was. All right. Who am I? I think is what Moses said. And Isaiah said it too. Who am I? Right? And what we end up doing over time, right, is that we've created a greater and greater divide between the person that may be standing near a pulpit and those that are sitting in the pews. It has never been the intent of any minister that I've ever met to create that divide. I've never known one that's wanted to create that divide. But I think in many congregations, in many churches, in many meetings, people have felt a bit overwhelmed at their sense of an inability to do what that person does. And the result of that is what I would call a pulpit-pew divide. Right? A pulpit-pew divide that really separates two different groups of people in every meeting, in every church. And that leaves many going, I really can't do that. That eventually becomes, I really can't do much of anything. And we see this divide create space. One author is actually a professor, said it this way. He said, the metaphorical space between the pulpit and the pew is unfortunate and unbiblical. It's unfortunate and unbiblical. Let me read to you what the Bible says. Okay? This is Ephesians chapter 4. It may be familiar for many of you. This is Paul writing a letter to a church. So it's a group of Christians. Right? And he's talking a little bit about the different responsibilities that people have and how some of them are in this lane and some of them are in this lane and some of them are in this lane. But listen to what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. He says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. So he's saying, I'm encouraging you to follow Jesus as you follow Jesus. All right? He's reiterating himself a little bit to make some emphasis here. And he says to do that with all humility and gentleness, with patience and bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. This is the way that you ought to follow Jesus. Peace, unity, right? Patience, gentleness, humility, love. And that sounds pretty good to me. I don't know about you. He goes on though, and he says, there's one body, there's one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. And then he uses the term but, right? Because he's kind of making a little bit of a contrast here. He says, but, though we are unified, grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. He's saying we're all a little different though. We are unified in Jesus, but we're all a little bit different in some sense. This is what he says. He says, therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. In saying that he ascended, Paul writes, well, what does it mean but that he who had also descended in the lower regions of the earth He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And then he goes on. He says this. He says, and he gave the apostles, prophets, evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Right? The ministers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up of the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, mature manhood, to the measure of stature of fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine or human cunning, chasing the world, even though it's changing, right? To avoid that, he says, rather, speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in every way in him who is the head, into Christ. We're to become more like Jesus, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. Right? A brief summary of what we're seeing here. Paul is saying, follow Jesus as you follow Jesus. Do it in this way, with unity, with love, with patience, with peace, and know that what binds you together also acknowledges and celebrates the uniqueness about each one of you. To celebrate and acknowledge the uniqueness about each of us. Different gifts, different abilities. Right? Some have been given this gift, and some have been given this gift. And then he says, for the ministers, your primary responsibility is not to avoid the work of the ministry. You're doing the work of the ministry too. But you're equipping all of those around you so that they too can participate in the work of the ministry. This is where I feel like in many churches we've gone sideways a little bit, maybe. Right? Because the ministers have done the work and equipped the people, done the work and equipped the people, and then next week there's a few less people, so they just do a little bit more work. And then the next week maybe there's a few less people that are doing the work, so they're just going to do a little bit more work. And over time, what happens is all of a sudden we've got 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. You see the slide? It's just easy to move toward. But Paul is saying here that there's an importance to every single Christian, whether you're good at organizing food, or whether you're good at playing an instrument, maybe you're good at teaching, maybe you're good at cleaning up afterwards, maybe you're good at rocking babies. Right? There's a place for all of it. There's an opportunity for all of those gifts to be used in the church, in your meetings. And Paul is affirming that and saying the work of the minister isn't just to do all the work, it's to equip the people to do the work alongside them. And so that's the big idea that we're going to talk about there. I'm going to pause, I think. Mike, we ready?
Sure, well, we're ready.
Good enough.
We're ready. I see a thumbs up. So we'll hand it off to you. So who's going to give some instruction?
There's salad back there, there's pizza, there's drinks over here, there's desserts over there. Help yourself, I guess, is the answer.
All right. Would it be okay if I pray a blessing over the food? Would that be okay?
Please do.
All right, let's pray together. Father, we thank you so much for how good you are, how faithful you are. Thank you for food, the reminder of all the good gifts that you give us. We know they're from you. Help us to enjoy them, Lord. We do pray for our friends in the Middle East and the Near East and all the things that they're experiencing right now. Father, we pray you protect them. And we pray, Lord, right now that this food will bless our bodies so that we might be able to serve you more faithfully. In Jesus' name, amen.